Into the Enchanted Forest, Book 1 of the Enchanted Forest series, written by Alicia J. Chumney, Chapter 3. They had been walking aimlessly for days when out of nowhere a gingerbread house appeared. There were a few crumbling edges, and they could see where hungry children had taken breaking and biting into the walls and candies decorating the outside. Melted sugar was crafted into a kaleidoscope window. Easily overlooked was the small sign beside the gate of a candy cane fence. "How does this house not dissolve when it rains?" Gabby questioned, looking around at everything, including the candied apples that were hanging from the trees. Jack simply answered her simply with one word: magic. Of course, she rolled her eyes in response. The small sign read Hansel and Gretel's Old-Fashioned Candy Shop, and was easily hidden by cotton candy shaped into flowers. "They must not want to do much business," Gabby idly remarked, while tapping on the sign as it entered the fence. Rolling his eyes, Jack carefully explained, "Hansel and Gretel's is a well-established local shop. People come from the surrounding kingdoms just for a chance at getting some of their homemade fudge and freshly baked gingerbread houses. Not everything can be judged based on appearances." Looking up at the house that was bigger than she expected it to be, Gabby wondered about their story. How many generations had run this particular shop? Why did they decide to stick around where they were almost cooked alive? Jack knew that it was time to explain the story to her. His recent visit let him know that the Brothers Grimm had not gotten every part of the story right. Leading Gabby to the rock candy bench, he started with parts of the story he doubted she knew. Hansel and Gretel were sent out into the woods by their father and stepmother. The stepmother, pregnant with the woodcutter's third child, never expected the children to return night after night, arms full of whatever errand they had been sent out on. One night, she slipped out to speak to the local witch. The tales about this woman's abilities and dietary preferences were far-reaching, but it never bothered the locals. Whenever a family was too poor to feed all of their children, they would send away the weakest child so that there would be more food around the table. Hansel and Gretel had no choice. Their stepmother knew that she could not get rid of one without the other. Taking a deep breath, Jack continued with the story. It was the first time he'd ever had to regale anybody with this particular story. That night she made a bargain with the witch, 2 children in exchange for her husband's circumstances to improve. Once their deal was made, the stepmother returned to her home, unaware that Hansel had been following her for the entire trip. That night he searched the house for anything he could use as a guide to help them return home, but all he could find was the bread meant for that morning's breakfast. The rest you already know. "But," Gabby interrupted, "that doesn't tell me how they gained the cottage." Snorting, Jack let down his guard for a moment and used a tone Gabby frequently recognized from her time sitting in class next to Ethan. "You have not let me finish." "Sorry." She knew that she needed to work on her impatience. Once the witch was cooked in the oven and turned into gingerbread, several other children reappeared from the walls and other places she had used gingerbread children instead of eating them. Among the children were several of their playmates and friends. Hansel had already carefully explained to Gretel about their stepmother's plans, and the other children in the cottage had heard his tale. They all decided to stay, including the baker's youngest daughter, who knew how to bake treats without children in them. Agatha and Miano ended up staying the longest, eventually marrying Hansel and Gretel. Our current proprietors are Mina and Tavin. They are married, but Tavin adopted some orphans from a Scandinavian orphanage. We have liaisons throughout the world that make dual world adoptions possible. Right then, somebody calling for Ingrich and Annalise echoed through the trees. "Time for dinner," the female voice sounded. Nearby, the sound of shrieks and 5 more minutes bounced from tree to tree. "No, now, and bring our guest with you," a masculine voice commanded. Looking up at Jack, Gabby's eyes reflected her question. "They have cameras," Jack explained, pointing towards one of the corner eaves. to deter anybody from eating the walls and windows. How did I miss that? You weren't looking. Nodding her head, Gabby stood and shook out her cloak. It was no longer the bright red that it had been only a few days before, but her heritage was still clear. Will they know that I'm also Wonderlandian? Not unless you want to tell them, Jack answered, pausing for a long moment. I don't want to tell them unless I have to, but I think that the tiny blue spade on your necklace will tell them for me. Jack looked down at the necklace he had long forgotten he was wearing, the universal sign for a royal family member's bodyguard. Anybody who recognized it would know that Jack was guarding a member of Wonderland's royal family. Slipping it into his shirt, he grinned and looked at her before asking, Better? Much. Mina had a secret. She had not gone through hell and back in order for some upstart royal to recognize her. Pamina, the daughter of the sun and the moon, had hidden away from her betrothed and parents, ever hopeful that being in a different realm and hidden among the trees would help hide her from their ever watchful gaze. She had not gone through hell only to lose Tamino 5 years later. She did not know how much Tavin knew about her, just that they had found each other in the enchanted forest and that she had two different colored eyes, silver and gold. But what she did not know was eclipsed by what she did know. Good evening, Your Majesty. Her Majesty's protector, she greeted her guest. Ignoring Gabby's look of shock, she led everybody into the cottage. She had paid Hansel and Gretel's remaining descendant into letting her manage the old-fashioned candy shop until Gretel could find somebody to help her carry on her family name. The other girl had been gone for 5 years now. Tavin never knew the truth. Looking closely, she knew there were still faint imprints of gingerbread children on the walls. Minnie cared not to think about the knife marks scoring the wooden table in the middle of the kitchen. She, out of anybody, knew you could change something's name, but you could never change its history. How did you know? Gabby whispered from behind her. Turning with her unsettling gaze, Mina met Gabby's blue stare. I know far more than I care to reveal. Gabby nodded her head. I understand, Pamina, was all she said. How? Mina whispered, ignoring the shocked look on the huntsman's face. Nobody has ever caught that. It was my adoptive parents' favorite opera, and I ended up devouring any retelling I could get my hands on. There weren't many, but there were enough. Panicked, Mina looked around the room before leaning forward and whispering, Don't tell Tavin. He doesn't know. Curiosity once again overtook her, and Gabby didn't resist the urge to ask, And the orphans? Letting out a bone-deep sigh, Mina confided in the princess. She doubted that a royal trying to hide underneath a red cloak would reveal any of the candy maker's secrets. They are the children I had with Tamino. My mother forced me to leave them behind by kidnapping them and depositing them at the orphanage shortly after Tamino's death. She thought they would be too much of a distraction with their brown eyes and brown hair. I think mother was angry that neither child took after me. Shouting from outside told the trio that Tavin and the children were about to return. Tilting her head, Gabby examined the woman sitting beside her. Something was not quite right about her appearance. Suddenly it occurred to her, and she whispered, But your hair. Leaning forward, Mina shared a secret that would prove useful later. I dye it using coffee or tea. Nodding her head, Gabby considered what she knew about natural hair dyes, which wasn't much. Clever. What is going on? Jack finally interrupted, not liking how the women were starting to lean in towards each other and whispering things that he could not hear. Turning to look at her bodyguard, Gabby quickly explained. The Enchanted Forest has a refugee. Turning to Mina, if you ever need a more secure location, I believe I'm within my rights to give you protection in Wonderland, if you ever need it. Jack tilted his head while he pondered her offer. It made him wonder just how much of a benevolent ruler the princess would make. Three bodies, one tall and two short, came tumbling into the kitchen. They could see that the little girl had grabbed a handful of candy and was stuffing it into her dress pocket. Without a word, Mina reached into the pocket and pulled out the colorful candy. You can get it back after dinner. Now, Enrich, Annalise, say hello to our guests, Jack and Gabby. Hello, the siblings greeted the travelers with a long look. Annalise even bobbed a slight curtsy before sliding into her seat. Hello, Jack and Gabby answered them, smiles carefully painted on their faces. You must stay for dinner, and later we'll insist on you taking some provisions for your long journey. There is no telling how long the forest will keep you wandering. Tavin slipped into his own seat while making his offer. Thank you very much, Jack accepted. Sometimes it gets quite difficult to shoot our own dinner if the forest does not allow it. He remembered how many times he had seen talking animals disappear into the trees moments after he realized exactly what he was aiming his bow towards.